The royal palace of Arrenville was beautiful on the outside. Inside it was a bit different. Prince Kieran of Arrenville, the seventh in line, the last of King Otar's children, knew this better than the others. He grew up in the eastern wing of the palace, in a room with a view of the utility courtyard, where from morning till evening carts with provisions rumbled and kitchen boys shouted. Not because there was no more space. The palace was huge, there were enough rooms. It just never occurred to anyone to give the prince another one. He was 23 years old, average height, build neither heroic nor frail, just ordinary. His face, if you looked carefully, was interesting. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that had the habit of looking a little longer than necessary, and a little more attentively than expected. But no one particularly looked carefully at the seventh prince. This was his main advantage. What was known about him was the following, and the entire court shared this opinion, from the first advisor to the last maid. Kieran of Arrenville is strange. Not malicious, not cruel, not depraved, just strange. Instead of hunting and tournaments, he sat in the library. Instead of feasts, he walked through the city markets and talked with merchants. He asked questions of blacksmiths, architects, healers, questions that seemed inappropriate for a prince to the advisors. He wrote something down in thick books that he had been keeping since he was 14. At tournaments, he performed poorly, not because he was weak, but simply because he always did something wrong. He fenced unconventionally, rode a horse not as he was taught. He won sometimes, but somehow indecently. Not beautifully, but as if he had calculated everything in advance and done exactly the minimum necessary for victory. This irritated everyone. His older brother Davor, handsome, loud, the court's favorite, once said at the common table, "Kieran is not a prince. Kieran is a bookworm who forgot that he is a prince." Everyone laughed. Kieran ate soup and did not react. This also irritated them. You cannot offend someone who does not take offense. His sisters Miela and Sorna treated him like furniture. He is present, does not interfere, takes up space. Sometimes they used him. Ask him to get a book from a high shelf, pass a note to the chamberlain, find out something boring in the library. Kieran did it without complaints, without reminders about payment. What the King Otar thought about him was hard to say. Otar was a busy man. 4 sons from his first wife, 3 daughters, and Kieran from the second. The first wife died early, her children were the favorites. The second wife died even earlier, Kieran was 2 years old. He did not remember her. The king sometimes looked at him at official dinners for a long time, with some expression that Kieran had learned not to analyze. Maybe guilt, maybe just fatigue. Kieran held no grudges. He held very little in general, neither grudges, nor hopes, nor illusions about his place in this palace. Instead, he kept 7 thick books in which he wrote down everything. The books were different. The first, architecture and construction. Everything he read, saw, asked the masters. Principles of stone masonry, vault systems, drainage solutions of Roman aqueducts that he found in old manuscripts, floor heating technologies that were used in the southern provinces 300 years ago. The second, economy and trade. How markets work, how prices formed, how a small trader becomes a merchant, how a merchant goes bankrupt and why, tax systems of different provinces in comparison, why some cities grow rich and others do not. The third, agriculture and land. Types of soils, irrigation systems, crop rotation, what grows in the north, what in the south, why one village feeds a city while another starves with the same amount of land. The fourth, war and defense. Not how to fight beautifully with swords. That did not interest him. But how a fortress holds, how an army is supplied, why some battles are won before they begin, and others are lost before the first blow sounds. The fifth, people and management. The thinnest and the most read. How to convince, how to command, how to betray, how to keep loyalty. What people need to work well. What is needed for them to believe the one who leads them. The sixth, nature and sciences. Chemistry that he studied from alchemists' treatises, throwing out mysticism and keeping facts. Mechanics, weather observations that he had been keeping for 3 years. The seventh was simply thoughts. Unformed, personal, ideas that had not yet become plans. Questions without answers. Sometimes sketches, sometimes one word on a page. These 7 books he kept in a chest under his bed. No one knew about them. The servants did not clean his room themselves. He did not allow it. He cleaned himself. This was also considered a strangeness. Life went on. Davor was engaged in military parades and hunting. The second brother, Ren, politics and intrigues. The third, Pierre, spent money on expensive horses and even more expensive women. The fourth, Sten, was quiet and unnoticeable, dealt with household matters. Kieran respected him a little. Of all the brothers, Sten at least did something useful. The sisters wove intrigues elegantly with smiles, as only people who grew up in the palace and never thought about what would happen if the walls were removed can do. Kieran read, walked around the city, thought. Once the father's advisor, old Irvin, a smart man, one of the few who looked at Kieran with something like interest, stopped him in the corridor. "What do you do in the city, Prince?" "I watch." "At what?" "At how everything is arranged." Irvin looked at him. "Why?" Kieran thought for a second. "Because it is interesting," he said. Irvin nodded slowly, noting something for himself. "Be careful, Prince," he said. "A smart man in the palace is sometimes more dangerous than a stupid one." "For whom?" "For everyone," said Irvin, "including yourself." Kieran thought about it later at night. He wrote in the 7th book, "Irvin sees me. The others do not. Need to decide whether this is a danger or an opportunity." He answered himself a line later. "For now, an opportunity, because they do not take me seriously. This will pass when there is a reason, so do not give a reason until I am ready." He closed the book. Lay down to sleep. Life went on, until the day when it stopped going as before. Everything began with a letter. Kieran found it on his table in the morning, on an ordinary day, without signature, without seal. Inside was a short text in neat handwriting. "This evening in the Eastern Garden. A man who wants to sell information about a conspiracy against the king. Come alone. Price 20 gold pieces." He read it twice, sat down, looked out the window at the utility courtyard. Thought. A normal prince in his place would either go out of curiosity or a desire to help his father, or would not go, deciding that it was stupidity or a provocation, or would tell someone, his father, an advisor. Kieran did the 4th. He wrote in the 7th book, "Letter without signature. Too convenient time. Father is receiving diplomats today. The palace is busy. The price is ridiculous. A real informant would ask for more. This is a trap. The question is whose." He thought some more. If Davor's, then he wants to compromise me before father. If Ren's, then he wants to get something in return. That's how he works. If Miela's, then I am interfering with some plan that I do not see. Pause. I do not interfere with anyone. I am nothing to everyone. So someone wants to get an ace, to have compromising material on me for the future, just in case. He closed the book, stood up, left the room. He went to the Eastern Garden. 3 were waiting for him. 2 people he did not know, clearly not from the palace, hired, and Ren. The older of the brothers stood in the shadow of an old oak, elegant, with a slight smile that was always a little colder than it seemed. Ren was 28, and he was the smartest of the brothers. Kieran had never denied that. It was just that Ren's cleverness was directed in one direction. "Unexpected," said Ren. "You came. Did you expect me not to come?" "I expected you to get scared and tell father." Ren looked at him with curiosity. "It would have been simpler then. They would just have laughed at you." "You came, so it will be worse. Explain worse." Ren showed. One of the hired men handed over a bundle. He unrolled it. Documents. With Kieran's seal, his personal seal that he used rarely. Correspondence supposedly with one of the kingdom's diplomatic enemies. Proofs that looked convincing that Kieran was selling information about military movements for money. Good work. Quality forgery. "Why?" asked Kieran. "Need a place," said Ren simply. "Not your place. You take up little space. Just need an ace." Pause. Father is getting old. The question of succession will become acute soon. 7 claimants is too many. Better to have something on each. On you it is the easiest. You do not watch your seal. What do you want? "Nothing now." Ren shrugged. "But if your voice, your signature, your silence is needed at the right moment, these letters will appear or will not appear on father's table." Kieran stood and looked at his brother. He thought quickly, methodically, as always. "Shouting is useless. There are no witnesses except the hired men. There is nothing to threaten with. I have no levers. Agree. Loss of position forever. Ren will press further. Refuse. The letters will reach father before I have time to explain." So the 4th. Fine, he said. Ren raised an eyebrow. Fine? Fine, repeated Kirin. You have an ace. Use it when you consider it necessary. Pause. You will not argue? No. You will not try to negotiate? No. Ren looked at him with that rare expression that he had when something did not go according to plan. You are strange, he said finally. I know, said Kirin. Everyone says so. He turned, went back to the palace. That same evening he wrote in the 7th book. Ren is acting, so something is happening with the succession. Something I do not see. Possibly father is ill. Possibly Devor has lost positions. Need to check. Ren's ace works only if I am here in the palace where my silence means something. If I am not here, the ace is devalued. Pause in the notes. Need to think about an exit. Not a retreat, an exit. These are different things. 3 weeks later, the letters ended up on father's table. Not through Ren, through Devor. It was unexpected and at the same time logical. The brothers acted together when their goals coincided. Kirin was summoned to the throne room. He walked through the palace corridors and thought calmly without panic. Panic would have been useless. He analyzed. Devor and Ren together means they need a quick result, not a long game. So they want to remove me now, not keep me as an ace. Why exactly now? He entered the throne room. Father sat on the throne. Aged, tired, with heavy dark circles under his eyes. Advisor Irvin stood aside, his face impenetrable. Davor and Ren on the right, Miela and Sorna on the left. Sten was absent. Ill, they said. Courtiers, guard, full assembly. Kirin, said father. Voice heavy, tired. Do you know why you were called? No, said Kirin. It was the truth. He did not know exactly which version they had chosen. The accusation of selling information was too crude. It required proofs, interrogations, time. So something else. Devor stepped forward. He took out the letters. Correspondence with the merchant Lem from the Varian lands. Voice-trained, confident, Devor knew how to speak publicly. Prince Kirin for 2 years has been passing information about the state of the treasury, about tax agreements with the northern provinces, about the movements of border detachments. Kirin listened. Not military espionage, but economic. Smarter, harder to refute because such information really leaked, just not through me. This is a lie, he said. Your seal, said Devor. A seal can be stolen. The handwriting is similar to yours. Handwriting can be forged. Davor smiled. Of course. Pause, but we have a witness. A man unknown to Kirin entered, unremarkable, with shifty eyes. Someone's servant, clearly bought. Kirin listened as the man spoke confidently, rehearsed. Saw meetings, passed packages, heard conversations. All lies, well prepared. He could have objected methodically on every point. He could have dismantled the witness's testimony and found inconsistencies. They were there, he had already seen several. But he looked at father. Otar was listening, face heavy, closed. He had already made a decision. It was visible from the way he sat, from the way he looked not at Kirin, but somewhere to the side. He knows this is not true or he doubts it, but it is convenient for him to believe it, because it solves the question he had long avoided. What to do with the 7th son whom there is nowhere to place and nowhere to put? Kirin stood and looked at father. Father looked to the side. Here it is, thought Kirin. Not anger, just fatigue. He is tired of the question and now glad of the answer, even if the answer is dishonest. What will you say? Asked father finally. Kirin was silent for a second. Then he said evenly, without a tremor in his voice, I will say nothing, father. Judge as you see fit. Silence in the hall. Devor expected objections. It was visible he was ready to argue. Ren looked at Kirin with the same expression as in the garden. Something had gone wrong in his plan. Irvin in the corner. He alone looked straight at Kirin. Barely noticeably nodded. Father finally looked at his son. You do not justify yourself. No. Why? Because you have already decided, said Kirin. The silence became different. Otar looked at him, and at that moment Kirin saw what he had not noticed before, or had not wanted to notice. Shame. Not guilt. Shame. These are different things. Exile, said father quietly, not execution. You are appointed Lord of the Darwin lands, in the north. Pause. Manage them as you can. Darwin lands. Kieran knew about them from the second book, from the third. A backwater. 3 villages, a little over 100 inhabitants. Mountains, forest, poor soil, cold climate. The nearest large city is 4 days' journey away. The Darwin lands gave the treasury practically nothing. From them, they collected a modest tax once a year, which barely covered the collector's salary. Exile. Honorable with a title, with formal power, and absolutely real. To go there meant to disappear. Understood, said Kieran. You have 3 days. Enough. He bowed correctly according to protocol, not a degree less than necessary. Turned, went to the exit. Davor said something quietly to Ren, laughed. Kieran did not hear what. It did not matter. At the doors, Irvin. The old man stood a little aside from the others, and when Kieran passed by, he said very quietly, almost without moving his lips, "Good luck, Prince, thank you," answered Kieran just as quietly. He went out. In the room he sat down, opened the 7th book, looked at the empty page for a long time, then he wrote slowly, larger than usual. Darwin lands, 3 villages, 100+ people. Mountains, presumably abandoned mines on the western slope. Cold climate. 4 days from the nearest city, new line, that's all. And under this, after a pause, in different ink, as if he had not made the decision immediately, enough. He spent 3 days in the library. He did not say goodbye to his brothers and sisters. He did not go to farewell dinners. He was not invited. He simply sat among the books and read. Chose, took notes, memorized. Everything there was about the Darwin lands. There was little, they did not interest anyone who wrote books. But he found something. An old chronicle. About 200 years ago, Darwin was not small. They mined iron there. Small mines in the mountains, sufficient for local needs. Then something happened. The chronicle did not explain exactly what, just the mines fell into disuse and people left. The 3 villages that remained were a fragment of what once was. The map was inaccurate, old, but at least something. 3 villages along the Darv River, mountain ridge to the west, forest to the north. 1 road, bad from the south. Soils, according to descriptions in the agronomic treatise, are not the best. A lot of stone, little Chernozem. But in the lowlands by the river it is different. There it is possible. The climate is harsh, winter is long, snow falls early. He read and made notes in the 3rd book, agriculture, and in the 2nd, economy. On the 2nd day, Irvin came. He simply came to the library without warning, sat opposite, watched as Kieran read. "You do not look broken," said the old man. "No. Most people after such a trial." "Most people did not expect a trial," said Kieran. "I expected it." "When?" "When I found the letter in the garden." Pause. "Or earlier." "I realized long ago that this would happen sooner or later. I just did not know the form." Irvin looked at him. "What are you reading? Everything about the Darwin lands that I can find?" "Why?" "There is nothing to read there." "There is little," agreed Kieran. "But little does not mean nothing." The old man was silent for a while. "May I ask a question, Prince?" "You may. What do you plan to do there?" Kieran closed the book, looked at Irvin. "What I have long wanted," he said. "Namely?" "To check," said Kieran. "All these books," he pointed to the shelves, "everything I read and thought and wrote down. This is theory. There will be practice. A backwater village is a bad place for experiments." "A good one," objected Kieran. "There is no one to interfere. There are no courtiers who will say that this is wrong. There are no traditions that cannot be broken." Pause. "There is only land, people, and what I managed to do." Irvin was silent for a long time. "You know," he said finally, "that when Ren and Davor see the result, if there is one, they will want to take it away." "I know." "And then what?" Kieran looked out the window. "Then I will be ready," he said. On the 3rd day, he packed his things. Few things. Spare clothes, practical, not courtly. Tools, several, he bought them himself at the market, did not take from the palace. And 7 books. All 7 in a leather bag that he carried himself. They gave him 1 horse, us and that old one. 2 servants from the younger ones, clearly assigned to watch rather than help. He took them, they would be useful. In the morning of the 3rd day, he left through the main gates of the palace. No one saw him off. He mounted the horse, looked at the palace for the last time calmly, memorized it, then turned away. touched the horse, rode north. 4 days on the road. On the first day, he thought about the palace. On the second, he stopped. On the third, he began to think about Darwin. He rode on the road, kept the 7th book on his knee, wrote swaying in the saddle. Unevenly, but legibly. First, people. 100 people or a little more. They are tired, probably. From poverty, from the feeling that they are forgotten. This needs to be understood before doing anything. You cannot build on people who do not believe. Second, money. There is no money. The Lord receives a share from the taxes of the territory. Darwin taxes are nothing, so first find a source. Mines? Possibly. Land? Slowly. Something else. Third, winter. Judging by the records in the Chronicle, winter there comes early, at the end of the 9th month. Now it is the beginning of the 7th. 2 months, this is the most important parameter. The first winter can kill the plan before it begins if not prepared. The 4th day, the road became worse. At first, just dirt, then almost a path, overgrown with deep ruts. The first village, Small Darv, appeared in the evening. He saw it from the hill. Low, dark houses, smoke over the chimneys, several vegetable gardens. Gray, small, tired. Even from a distance, there was a feeling that the village had somehow shrunk, as if it did not want to take up much space. Kieran stopped the horse on the hill, looked. The 2 servants stood nearby and waited. "Lord," said one, "are we expected in the village?" "No," said Kieran. "Then maybe announce the arrival?" "No, again." "How then?" "We will ride in quietly," said Kieran. "We will look." They descended from the hill. They rode into the village already at dusk. Several people on the street stopped and looked. Distrustfully, tiredly. Strangers were not a rarity, but not an ordinary thing in such places. Kieran dismounted at the well in the center of the village. Looked around. Houses old, some with rotten logs. The well wooden, creaky. The road, mud, no paving. Smell of smoke, manure, damp wood. An old man approached, bent with a stick. Looked at Kieran. "Who are you?" "The new lord," said Kieran. "Kieran, I will live here." The old man looked for a long time. "Lord," he repeated without intonation. "Yes, we have not been sent a lord for a long time." "I know, and why were you sent?" Kieran thought for a second. He could have said officially, with titles and dignity. But he looked at the old man, at the village, at the tired faces that were gathering around. "Honestly," he said. "Better honestly," said the old man. "I was exiled from the capital," said Kieran. "They thought it was a punishment." Pause. "I think otherwise." The old man looked at him. "How so?" "We will see," said Kieran. The first week he listened. He did not announce plans. He did not issue orders. He did not say what he would do. He simply walked. 3 villages, Small Darv, Upper Darv, and River, stood along the river at an hour's walk from each other. Together about 130 people, families mostly not young. The youth left for the southern cities at the first opportunity. He walked and talked with the blacksmith, the only one for 3 villages, with the miller by the river, with the women who managed the vegetable gardens, with the hunters who knew the forest, with the old headman whose name was Bren, and who turned out to be smarter than he looked. He asked simple questions. What grows, what does not grow? Where they get sick, from what? What is needed most often? What is missing? Where the money goes? Those few that there were. People answered first cautiously, then more openly. It was unusual for them that the Lord asked. Lords usually demanded. He wrote down every evening in the 2nd and 3rd books. Facts, numbers, names. By the end of the week, the picture became clear. The land gave little, not because it was bad everywhere, but because it was cultivated incorrectly. They sowed the same thing for decades. The soil was depleted. There was no irrigation, and they depended on rains. In a dry summer, they starved. Money went for salt and metal. Both were brought from the south, paid 3 times the price because there were no other suppliers. They got sick from the water. The wells were shallow, polluted in drought. Child mortality. Kieran did not ask directly, but from how many children there were and how many there should have been, he understood. Houses old, cold. In winter they heated a lot. There was not enough firewood. The mines. He asked about the mines on the western slope. Bren was silent for a while. Abandoned long ago, he said. 100 years, maybe more. They say there was iron there. Then something went wrong. A collapse or something? I don't know. They closed and that's it. Has anyone gone there? Hunters sometimes. Bears live there. Why go? To look. Bren looked at him. What? Are you planning to go into the mines? Maybe. There is a collapse, I tell you. We will see how big it is. On the 8th day, he went into the mountains. He took Bren as a guide and he grumbled but went. And one of the hunters, a young guy of about 20 named Thorn, he himself asked to go out of curiosity. 3 hours up the slope. Forest at first, then stone and bushes. Bren was out of breath. Thorn walked easily. They found it. 3 entrances to the mine, low, dark, overgrown. One completely blocked. The collapse was here. The fresh timber of the supports had long rotted. Everything had collapsed. The second partially, one could squeeze through. Kieran took a lantern, squeezed through. Inside darkness, smell of damp earth and old stone. He walked slowly, shone the lantern, looked. The walls of the mine, like old masonry of supports, mostly rotted. The rock, dark basalt, veins of something light. He took a sample, broke off a small piece with the butt of his knife. Looked in the light of the lantern. Iron ore, as it was clear. Not rich, but sufficient. He went further, about 30 meters deeper, to where the support held better. Stopped. Shone on the floor of the mine. Water, a small puddle by the wall. Something glittered in it in the light of the lantern. He squatted, looked carefully. Particles, small, yellow, almost unnoticeable. He scooped up a handful of water, looked at his palms as the water flowed away. Several particles remained on the skin. He stood up, went outside. Bren and Thorn were waiting. Bren with the look of a man who was already tired of it. Found anything? Asked Thorn. Possibly, said Kieran. Iron? Iron too. Pause. Need a person who knows how to read the rock. Is there anyone like that in the villages? Bren thought. Old Mert, he said. His grandfather worked in the mines before. He knows something. Tomorrow I want to talk to him. Bren looked at him with an expression that Kieran was already beginning to recognize among the locals. Not mockery. Something like cautious interest. A lord who goes into mines and wants to talk to an old man. This was not what they expected. Good, said Bren. They descended from the mountain. Kieran carried the rock sample in his pocket and thought. If there is iron, and already something, blacksmith tools, trade. If what is in the water is what I think, then everything changes completely. But first check. First make sure. Do not rush. Old Mert was about 70 years old, no less. Small, dry, with hands that remembered hard work, gnarled, strong, despite his age. He lived alone in the outermost house of Smaldarv. He kept goats. Kieran came to him in the morning. Without servants, without ceremonies. He knocked. Who? From behind the door. The new lord. Pause. What do you need? To talk about the mines. The door opened. Mert looked at him distrustfully, squinting. A lord in the mines? First time I've heard. I was there yesterday, said Kieran. May I come in? Mert stepped back. The house was poor but clean. On the wall, his old tools, mining, long unused. Mert noticed the glance. Grandfather's still, he said. We kept them. Memory. Kieran sat down on the offered bench. He took out the rock sample. Put it on the table. Mert looked. Then took it. Turned it. Brought it to the window. Scratched with his nail. Iron, he said. Not rich, but there is. I know, said Kieran. He took out a rag in which he had wrapped what he had collected from the floor of the mine. Particles from the bottom of the puddle, dried. Put it next to it. Mert looked at the rag, then raised his gaze to Kieran. Where did you take it? From the floor of the second mine. Water stood by the eastern wall. Mert took the rag, brought it to his eyes. Was silent for a long time. Grandfather told, he said finally, slowly, that the mines were closed not because of the collapse, pause, because of the water. When they started digging deeper, water came. Strongly. They could not pump it out, abandoned it. And what did he say about the water? Mert looked at the particles in the rag. He said yellow water. Bad, cannot drink. He fell silent. They thought some disease. Not a disease, said Kieran quietly. Mert looked at him. No? No. Pause. Is there definitely coal there? Asked Kieran. There is. The third mine. There was coal there, grandfather said. They did not mine it particularly, they were looking for iron. Good. What have you planned, Lord? Asked Mert directly. You are not a standard lord, that is visible. Kieran looked at the old man. I want to open the mines, he said. To begin with the coal one. Coal is needed immediately for the forge, for heat in winter. Then the iron one, clean it, strengthen it, mine. Pause. And the third one with water, but at last, carefully. Mert was silent. You have no people for the mines, he said finally. No working hands. The youth has left. They will come, said Kieran. If you pay, they will come. From nearby villages, from the city. There is no money either. Not yet. Kieran was silent for a while. Mert, do you know how to work in a mine? I do. I used to. Will you help me set up the work? The old man looked for a long time. Why me? Because you know these mountains. Because your grandfather worked there and told you things that are in no book. Pause. And because you have smart eyes. Mert scratched the back of his head. No one has ever called me for my mine before, he muttered. First time for everything, said Kieran. The old man looked at his grandfather's tools on the wall, was silent. What do you pay? He asked finally. For now, not much. I really have no money, but a third of what the coal mine brings in the first month is yours. Mert calculated something for himself. All right, he said. The first mine was opened in 2 weeks. Not in one day, methodically, step by step. First, Mert walked around all 3 entrances, tapped the rock, assessed the condition. He gave his verdict. The third coal mine requires clearing the collapse of the entrance inside the support holds better than it seemed. Kieran announced the work the next morning. 7 people came voluntarily without coercion. Kieran did not demand. He simply said at the village meeting that people were needed, that he would pay, that the work was not endless. 7 people was not many, but it was something. He worked himself. This surprised everyone, a lord with a shovel. Bren watched this for several minutes with the look of a man who was seeing something that contradicted his picture of the world. Then silently took a second shovel and stood beside him. The collapse was cleared in 3 days. Hard work. Stone and rotten wood, dust, cramped space. Kieran worked as much as the others, no more, no less. He did not demonstrate, did not prove anything. He simply did it. In the evenings, he sat with Mert by the fire, going over what they had learned during the day. What kind of rock? How the vein runs? Where to strengthen the next beams? Mert turned out to be a treasure trove. His grandfather had taught him properly not only where to dig, but how to read the mountain. The sound when tapping, the smell of the rock, the behavior of water. Small signs that are written in no treatise. Kieran listened. He wrote it down in the 6th book, Nature and Sciences. It grew thicker every day. On the 4th day, they went inside. There was coal. Not in a thin layer, the vein went deep, wide, almost black in the light of the lanterns. Mert struck with a pick. The rock crumbled easily, the coal was soft. Good. A lot, said Mert. His voice was even, but Kieran had already learned to read the old man. It was admiration. How much? For years ahead, if you dig carefully. Kieran stood in the darkness of the mine and shone the lantern on the coal vein. He thought, coal is fuel. First, solve the problem of winter. The villages are freezing. Then a forge with coal. The blacksmith works 3 times more efficiently. Then trade. Cities need coal and southern merchants will pay. But first winter. Winter comes before everything. Mert, he said. Yes. How much coal do the 3 villages need for winter? The old man thought. If every house 1 sack per week. 4 months of winter, he muttered to himself. About 40 households. 600 sacks, maybe 700. And how long can we mine it? With 7 people, Mert estimated. 3 weeks if we do it well. So 3 weeks for the villages. Then we start selling. They came out of the mine. Kieran gathered all 7 at the entrance. Listen, he said. There is coal. Good coal. The first thing we do is every family in the villages gets a supply for winter. For free. Pause. Then we sell. We divide the money like this. Half goes to the common treasury for construction, a quarter to you as workers, a quarter for the maintenance and development of the mines. The people looked at each other. Free for the villages? Asked one red-haired, broad-shouldered man named Gord. That means you take nothing for yourself from this? For now, no. Then why? Because people who do not freeze in winter work in summer, said Kieran. People who freeze get sick and die. That is bad economy. Gord looked at him. I have never heard a lord speak like that. I have heard different lords, said Kieran. Most of them governed poorly. Someone laughed shortly, cautiously. It was a good sign. They worked intensively for 3 weeks. 5 more people joined the mine workers. Word spread through the villages that the lord paid honestly and worked himself. That was a sufficient argument. The coal was distributed to the houses in sacks on carts. Kieran himself took part in the first distribution. He walked from house to house, greeted people, talked. People now looked at him differently. Not as a stranger from the capital, but as something incomprehensible yet their own. He did not demand, did not threaten, did not explain that he was a prince and that they were lucky. He simply did it. 1 episode in the second week. He was carrying a sack of coal to a house by the river. A lonely woman, a widow, 3 children. He knocked. She opened, saw the lord with a sack over his shoulder, and opened her mouth. Coal for winter, said Kieran. Where should I put it? She was silent for a long time. By the shed, she said finally. He carried it there. When he was returning, she stood on the threshold. Lord, she called. Yes. Why do you carry it yourself? The servants are busy. You have 2 servants who sit in your house all day. Kieran stopped, looked at her. You're right, he said. To be more honest, and because I want to know every house, every family, so that I manage not by numbers, but by people. The woman looked at him. You are a strange lord. Everyone says so, said Kieran. On the 22nd day, the first convoy with coal left for the south. Not a big one. 3 carts, not the cleanest coal, the most accessible first layer. But Kieran wrote letters to the 2 nearest cities, Velm and Art, himself by hand, without intermediaries. He offered a price 10% lower than ordinary suppliers gave. The answer came in a week. From Velm, the merchant sought, a fuel trader. He answered cautiously, skeptically, but he answered. Coal from the Darwin lands? I have not heard before. If the quality is confirmed, I am ready to take the first batch for testing. Bring samples. Kieran wrote back 15% below market price, sending samples with the same courier. 4 days later, Sot sent consent for the first large batch. The first money came in 3 weeks. Not huge, but real. More than the Darwin lands had seen in a year before. Kieran sat in the evening with the numbers. He laid out on paper income, expenses, what could be done immediately, what needed planning. He wrote in the 5th book, People and Management. The first principle is proven. Give people stability and honesty and they will begin to believe. When they begin to believe, they will begin to work differently. Not out of fear, but out of interest. The difference is enormous. And on the next line, now the second principle. Money needs to be invested faster than spent. Not to accumulate, to build. Every gold piece spent now must bring 3 in a year. He closed the book. He began to make a list of what to do next. The list turned out long. He wrote it for 3 evenings in a row without haste, checking every point for logic. Then he rewrote it in order of priority, with rough estimates of cost and time. First, water. The wells in the villages were bad, shallow, polluted in summer. 3 people from River Village fell ill every summer. Kieran learned from the local healer that the diseases were intestinal, waterborne. Children died from it. The Darv River flowed through all 3 villages. Clean, fast, good water. It needed to be brought to the villages. Not an aqueduct. Too expensive for now. But wooden troughs on supports from the river to the village were realistic. He had seen something similar in the 3rd book. A description of an irrigation system used in mountain villages of the southern provinces. Adapting it for Darv was solvable. Second, roads. The road from the south was the only one and bad. In autumn, impassable mud. In winter, snow. In spring, mud again. Goods could not be transported. Merchants would not come. Not to pave everything with stone. Too expensive and long. But key sections where the road turned to mud the most. Drainage and gravel. There was enough gravel in the mountains. Third, houses. Most houses in the villages had stood for a long time. 30, 40 years. Logs rotten in places, gaps poorly caulked, earthen floors. Not to demolish and build new ones. No resources. But to help repair the most critical and show people the technique he had found in the 1st book. Clay plaster with straw inside? Good thermal insulation. Cheap, accessible. Both clay and straw are here. Fourth, farm. Agriculture in the villages was done the old way. They sowed the same thing, did not fertilize, did not rotate. Kieran knew about crop rotation, about winter crops, about how to use manure from livestock properly. This required no money, only knowledge. Fifth, forge. The local blacksmith, Var, worked with old equipment. With coal, it would become easier for him, but a second blacksmith was needed. Var alone could not cope with growing needs. Kieran wrote to Velm looking for a blacksmith's apprentice who would want to move for good pay. Sixth, people. Sixth, the youth left the villages because there was no work. If work appeared, they would return or new ones would come. For new people, housing was needed. So, construction. This was the key point. If the villages began to grow, the whole plan would accelerate. More working hands, more taxes, more opportunities. He looked at the list. Long. Expensive. Money from coal was not yet enough for everything at once. So priority. Water first. Winter came and went normally with coal, but the summer illness regularly killed people. This could not wait. Road second. Without a normal road, there would be no trade, and without trade, there would be no money for the rest. Then the rest as funds came in. He showed the list to Bren. The old headman read for a long time, slowly, syllable by syllable. Then he looked at Kieran. This is for how many years? With a good scenario, 2 years for the main part, said Kieran. Then further. Further? This is only the beginning, Bren. The old man looked at him. Do you really think all this can be done? He asked. Here? Yes, there is no money. Not yet. There are no people. Not yet. There is no experience of such construction. But there are books, said Kieran. Bren looked at him, then unexpectedly laughed. For the first time in all the days Kieran had known him, genuinely from the belly. Books, he repeated. All right, what should I do? Gather all the headmen tomorrow morning, of the 3 villages. I will explain once to everyone at once. In the morning, all 3 came. Bren from Smaldarv. An elderly woman, Ina from Upper, dry, sharp, with eyes that assessed quickly and accurately, and a young man, Rick from River, 30 years old, laconic, hands like a man who has worked all his life. They sat in the house that Kieran had taken for something like an office. The largest in Smaldarv, formerly a barn. A table, benches. On the wall Kieran had hung a drawing he had made the day before. A rough scheme of the 3 villages with the river. He explained the plan. Without haste, point by point. Water, road, houses, farm, mines, growth. He showed on the scheme, answered questions. Ina listened silently, but Kieran saw how her head worked by her eyes, by the way she sometimes slightly pursed her lips when she heard something doubtful. At the end she asked, Water through troughs. How much does it cost? We have our own wood, said Kieran, our own work. The main costs are fasteners, metal joints. That is from the forge, that is not expensive. Pause. Roughly as much as we earn in 3 weeks of coal now. We could spend this money on something else, we could, he agreed. But in River, every summer people get sick from the water. How many children have you lost in the last 10 years? Ina was silent. 4 just from us, said Rick quietly. In River? 4, repeated Kieran. These are workers you do not have. These are families that later left for the cities because of grief. Pause. Clean water is not an expense. It is an investment. They did not know the word investment, he explained. An investment that returns more, Anna thought. All right, she said. Water first. I agree. Rick nodded. Bren. He had already agreed yesterday. Now the main question, said Kieran. I need people. Workers. For the water supply, for the road, for the mine. Our own are not enough. We need to attract from neighboring villages, maybe from Velm. Strangers are problems, said Bren. They will come, take the money, leave. Not all, said Kieran. If you give housing and permanent work, some will stay. That is what we need. Build housing? Yes, where is the money for housing? From the mine. Kieran showed the calculation, rough by hand, but understandable. In half a year at the current mining rate, there will be enough for the first 5 or 6 new houses. Small, but solid. Half a year, said Rick. If we find additional financing, faster. Where from? I am working on that, said Kieran. He had been working on it for several days already. He thought about the second mine, the iron one. Iron did not give such quick income as coal. Processing was needed. But the blacksmith needed metal, and now it was brought from the south at a high price. If they opened the iron mine and gave Vard local raw material, the cost of the forge's products would fall. They could sell tools and fasteners to neighboring villages. There was always demand for that. But there was the third mine, the one with yellow water. Kieran returned to it in his thoughts every day. The particles he had seen on his palm gave him no peace. He wrote in the 6th book everything he knew about metals from alchemists' treatises. He reread it several times. Yellow metal, soft, heavy, does not rust. Found in mountain rocks and in river deposits. When washing the rock with water, it settles heavier. He had to make sure. On the 8th day after arriving in Darv, he took Mert and Thorn and went up into the mountains again. This time to the third mine. The entrance was worse than the second, almost completely blocked. But on the side there was a small passage, natural between the stones. Kieran squeezed through. Inside it was darker, tighter. The smell of water was stronger. He walked about 20 meters. He found a puddle larger than the first time. Apparently a recent rain had raised the level. He squatted, brought the lantern closer. Yellow particles. There were more of them. Clearly visible in the lantern light, scattered on the dark bottom. He took a clean rag, carefully collected them, washed them in the puddle several times, sorted them, wrapped them up, came out. Mert looked at his face. What is there? I do not know exactly yet, said Kieran. A check is needed. What check? Kieran thought for a second. Mert, he said, is there an alchemist or a jeweler in Velm? There is a jeweler. Expensive. It does not matter. I will write to him today. They descended the mountain in silence. Thorn walked next to Kieran. The young man was observant. Kieran had noticed that long ago. He looked at the rag in the Lord's hand. Is this gold? He asked quietly. Kieran looked at him. Where did the thought come from? Grandfather told, said Thorn, about the yellow water in the old mines. He said wealth was hidden there. I thought fairy tales. Maybe fairy tales, said Kieran. We will know soon. But in the 7th book that evening, he wrote one line. If this is what I think, everything changes. The pace is different. The scale is different. Prepare for big things. The answer from the jeweler came in 10 days. Kieran sent the samples with a merchant convoy that was going to Velm together with a letter to the jeweler Tern. Short and precise. Please determine the composition of the sample. Payment any reasonable. Confidentiality mandatory. The jeweler answered personally. He came himself. A small man, neat with glasses on a chain, clearly surprised that he had been called to the god-forsaken Darvant lands. He had come out of curiosity, Kieran saw that. They met in the office. Tern put a small bundle on the table. The samples cleaned, washed, laid out on clean paper. Do you know what you sent me? He asked. I assume, said Kieran. Gold, said Tern. Not rich content, but pure. I checked by several methods. Pause. And something else. What else? The jeweler took out another smaller bundle, opened it. On the paper lay several small transparent crystals, cloudy, uneven. Kieran looked. Where is this from? He asked. From the same sample. Tern looked at Kieran over his glasses. In the rock you sent along with the gold particles. I separated them because I became interested. What is it? Uncut diamonds, said Tern quietly. Small, but diamonds. Silence. Kieran sat and looked at the crystals, he thought. Not about wealth, about complexity. Gold and diamonds in one place meant that the third mine was not just a resource. It was a situation that required caution. If the rumor got out before he was ready, people would come here, not merchants. People with weapons. Did you tell anyone? Asked Kieran. No, said Tern. Your letter required confidentiality. I keep my word. Good. Pause. I ask you to keep your word for some more time. Tern looked at him. For how long? Until I am ready, said Kieran. And what does ready mean? It means, said Kieran, that before everyone learns what is here, there must be a wall. Guards, law, and people who know how to protect all this. Tern looked for a long time. You are an unusual person, Lord Kieran. Everyone says so. I mean it as a compliment. I know, said Kieran. Thank you. He offered the jeweler good pay to become the official appraiser of Lord Darwin. Permanent work, good conditions. Tern thought for exactly 1 minute. I agree, he said, but I will not move for now. I will come. That will do. After Tern left, Kieran sat alone in the office for a long time. In front of him on the table lay the gold particles and 3 small crystals. He thought about the list, the one he had written for 3 evenings. The list was correct, but the pace was wrong. Now it could be faster, much faster, but carefully. You cannot suddenly start building palaces in a village of 3 houses. The rumor will spread instantly. It will reach the capital before he is ready. So moderately, sequentially, so that the growth looks natural, earned, not sudden. He opened the 7th book. Gold and diamonds confirmed. The 3rd mine is the main asset, for now closed, secret. Work only with coal and iron. They are enough to explain the growth. Open the 3rd quietly with a small team, the most reliable people. New line, reliable people. This is now the main resource. There is money, there are no people. Start recruiting. The first was Mert, he already was. Reliable, knowledgeable, silent. The second was Thorn, a young hunter from River, 21 years old, smart, observant, physically strong. Kieran talked to him separately for a long time, honestly. I want to offer you a job, he said. Not in the mine. Next to me. What does next to me mean? It means assistant. Do what I say. Sometimes go where I say, sometimes keep silent about what you saw. Pause. I will pay well. Thorn looked at him. Why do you need me? He asked directly. I'm a hunter, not educated. I will give you education, said Kieran. I need a person with a good head and good hands, and with local roots, someone the people here trust. Pause. Do they trust you? Probably. That means yes. Kieran looked at the young man. I do not deceive, Thorn. The work will be hard, sometimes dangerous, but in 5 years you will know and be able to do more than most people in this kingdom. Thorn was silent for a long time. I agree, he said finally. The 3rd unexpectedly became Ina. The old dry woman from Upper came to Kieran herself a week after the meeting. I heard you were recruiting people, she said without preamble. Correct. I know how to count. She put a piece of cloth on the table on which something was written. These are my calculations of the village expenses for 3 years. I kept them myself. Pause. No one asked. I just did it. Kieran took the cloth. Looked. Neat columns. Correct arithmetic. Conclusions brief, precise. Why did you keep them? Because it is interesting to see where the money goes, said Ina. And because when you see it, you can fix it. You are right, said Kieran. Do you want to work with me? I want to know what you do with the money you earn. I will show you. Then yes. A month after arriving in Darv, Kieran had 4 reliable people, a working coal mine, the first money, and a plan. 2 months later, the water supply in River Village was almost ready. Wooden troughs on supports from the river, 120 meters. Kieran designed it himself according to descriptions from the 3rd book, adapted to local material. Locals built it with 2 hired carpenters from Velm. On the day they opened the flow, they let water through the troughs. The entire River Village gathered. The water flowed clean and even. It filled a large wooden reservoir in the center of the village from which it could be drawn with buckets. Children watched the water flow through the trough. Some touched it with their hands. Rick stood next to Kieran. He was silent for a long time. This is good, he said finally. Briefly, but there was something more in his voice. Next spring we will do it in Small and Upper, said Kieran. Can we? We can. Rick looked at him. I want you to know, he said, that we here are not used to being thought about. Lords used to come once a year, take the tax, leave. Pause. This is different. I know, said Kieran. I am saying this because the people here, they trust you now. Seriously? Good, said Kieran. Do not lose it, said Rick simply. Kieran looked at the water flowing through the troughs and thought that this had been the most important conversation in 2 months. Not about mines, not about money, about trust. In the 3rd month, they began to build. Not to supplement the old, to build new. Kieran chose a place halfway between Small and Upper Darv, where the valley was wider and the river made a small bend, creating a flat area. Here? Bren looked at the empty field. Here. Completely empty. For now. Empty. The first building was not a palace, not a town hall, an inn. Practical reason? Workers, merchants, craftsmen would come. They needed somewhere to spend the night. An inn gives housing and income at the same time. They built from stone. Mountains nearby, enough stone. Kieran showed the masonry technique from the first book, from the section on stone construction. Double wall with rubble filling inside. Warm, strong. The workers learned quickly, especially the young ones. Kieran noticed that some watched as he explained the technique and remembered not just how to do it, but why. It was a good sign. The inn was built in 6 weeks. Small at 12 rooms, a common hall, a stable for 8 horses. Simple on the outside, but warm and dry inside. On the very first night after opening, 3 rooms were occupied. Merchants from Velm who had come for coal. Kieran sat in the common hall, had dinner, listened to the merchants' conversations. He did not participate, he listened. One of them, young and lively, looked around. "Good place," he said to his comrade. "I did not expect it in Darv." "The Lord here is new," said the second. "They say he is doing something. It is visible." Kieran ate soup and thought that in a year these merchants would tell about it in Velm. In 2 years, in other cities. Rumor is the cheapest marketing. In parallel, the iron mine. Mirt took over the management, hired 5 workers from neighboring villages, people with experience in earthworks. They cleared the second entrance, strengthened the support not with rotten wood as before, but with fresh oak from the local forest. Iron started coming. Not immediately. The first 2 weeks they cleaned the old tunnels, removed collapses. But by the end of the 3rd week, the first cart of ore came to the forge. Var looked at the ore as at something impossible. "Local iron," he said. "I have never carried it." "Now you will," said Kieran. "Quality?" Mirt says average, not the best. "Enough for tools." "Exactly." Vayer smelted the first batch. Made 2 shovels, several axes, fasteners for construction. The cost was 3 times lower than when metal was brought from the south. Kieran looked at the numbers that Ina had given. "Good," he said. "Very good," said Ina. "If we set it up regularly, we will be able to sell tools to neighboring villages. They always need them. That is exactly what we will do." They opened the 3rd mine quietly. Only Mirt, Thorn, and 2 workers whom Kieran had selected personally. Elderly, local, with families in the village. People with an anchor. They had something to lose and nowhere to run. Kieran himself explained to each one. "What you find in mine here cannot be spoken about. To no one. Not to your wife, not to your neighbor, not in the tavern." Pause. "I will pay triple the usual rate, and I explain why to keep silent." He explained, honestly, without embellishment. "If the rumor gets out, people from the capital will come here with papers and weapons. They will say that the Darvan lands are too valuable for a minor lord and will take everything. And me and you and your families, they will make paupers." Silence. "When can we speak?" asked one. "When I say," answered Kieran. "And by that time it will no longer be scary to speak." They began extraction slowly, carefully. They bailed out water with buckets for a long time, heavily. Gradually they cleared the lower horizon where the vein ran. There was not much gold, but it was stable. Every week a small bag of washed particles. Fewer diamonds, but they were there. All this Kieran personally took to turn in Velm once a month without guards, alone, like an ordinary merchant with a coal convoy. Turn converted it into money through his people, carefully, in small portions, so as not to raise questions. The money returned to Darv, and went into construction. 6 months after Kieran's arrival, the place between the villages could no longer be called an empty field. The inn. Next to it a new large forge with 2 forges. Var took a second master, a boy from Velm. Opposite was a warehouse for coal and ore. By the river an updated mill with a new wheel that Kieran had designed himself, according to a scheme from the first book. And the first new houses. Not peasant huts, normal houses. Stone foundation, wooden walls with clay plaster, a proper roof, windows with glass, the first in Darv at all. Kieran had made an agreement with a glassmaker from Art, bought at wholesale price. Glass in the windows produced a greater effect than anything else. People came just to look at how light passed through transparent glass. For them it was almost magic. "Every house we build will have glass," said Kieran at the meeting. "Expensive," someone said. "Less expensive than in a year. We will order a lot and get a discount." Pause. And the glassmaker from Art wants to open a workshop here. I talked to him. If he opens in 2 years, we will make our own glass. People looked at each other. The old people remembered when this place had been a meadow. By this time, there were already about 40 new residents. They had come from different places. Some from neighboring villages where there was no work. Some from Velm where they were tired of the city. Mostly young with hands and desire. Kieran talked to each one. Not officially, just talked. Who they were, what they could do, what they wanted. He now kept a separate list of people, their skills, their ambitions. A carpenter from Art, good, experienced. Kieran offered him to open a workshop, rented him a plot for a symbolic fee for the first year. The carpenter agreed. A healer, an elderly man, Dam, who had practiced in a village near Velm. He came to look and stayed when Kieran showed him a place for a clinic. There is no clinic here, said Dam. That is exactly why I am inviting you. Who will pay? Part from the treasury, part from those who can. Those who cannot, free. Dam looked at him. Free for the poor? Yes. Lords do not do that. This one does, said Kieran. Dam arrived a month later with his family and tools. Sewage was a difficult conversation. Kieran explained to Bren and the headman what it was for a long time. They looked with the expression of people being told something obviously insane. Pipes underground so that waste goes away, summarized Bren. Yes. Why? Because now it goes into the river, said Kieran. And from the river comes the water supply. Pause. Do you understand the problem? Pause. We understand, said Rick. Is this expensive? Asked Ina. Expensive, agreed Kieran. But cheaper than paying the healer for diseases that will not happen if done correctly. Ina was calculating something in her head. Kieran saw it. How much for construction? Depends on the length. We will start from the center, the new houses and the inn. Then we expand. What kind of pipes? Wooden for now. Hollowed out like the water supply, but underground. He showed the scheme. First down the slope to a settling tank beyond the settlement. There a deep pit, waste settles, water goes into the ground. Away from the river. Ina looked at the scheme. Does this work? It works in the southern cities. Pause. Only there it is stone and here it will be wood. Less durable. But to start with wooden, then replace with stone. The right strategy. When? This autumn, said Kieran. Before winter, the main line. In spring we expand. Bren looked at the scheme. You are already building a whole city, he said. Yes, said Kieran. This was a meadow half a year ago. It was a meadow. Bren shook his head. Not denying, just realizing. What will we call it? He asked. As you want, said Kieran. Bren thought. New Darv, he said. Simple and clear. Let it be New Darv, agreed Kieran. Winter came at the end of the 9th month as Kieran had predicted. Early, sharply. Overnight snow lay half a meter deep. The temperature dropped so that breath froze in the air. Kieran stood in the morning by the window of the inn. He lived there until there was his own house in the most modest room on principle, and looked at the white New Darv. He thought about heating. This was a question he had been preparing for 3 months. Ordinary stoves in houses were good, but he had a better idea. In the first book, the section on baths and thermal systems, ancient builders of the south made channels under the floors through which hot air went from a central furnace. The floors were warm, the house held heat better. Adapting for New Darv, he thought exactly how. Not for every house, expensive and complicated, but for public places, the inn, Dam's clinic, the future town hall, it was realistic. The system was simpler than it seemed. A central furnace in the basement. From it, brick channels under the floor branched. Hot air goes through the channels, heats the floor, exits through small openings by the walls. The furnace is fed with coal from the mine. Kieran had built a test sample in the inn back in autumn. Small in the common hall. It worked. In winter, when frost cracked outside, in the common hall of the inn it was warm without heating a huge fireplace. Guests came in, took off their cloaks, sat down and did not get up for a long time, because heat came from below, from the floor, evenly. Merchants who stopped by asked how it was made. Kieran explained without secrets. It was another way to attract people to New Darv. If a merchant comes and sees something he wants to repeat at home, he returns, tells others. Winter for the 3 villages this year was different. Coal was in every family. They had made a supply back in September. Kieran personally checked house by house. Those who had less than needed were reported from the common warehouse. The houses that had been repaired using the clay plaster technique held heat noticeably better. Not everyone had managed before winter, and about 20 people came for help too late. Kieran quickly organized a team before the big frosts. In 2 weeks, they went through the remaining houses. Fewer diseases. Dam noted this in the very first month of winter. Usually by this time, I already have 5 or 6 with cough, and another 2 with what happens from cold, he said. So far, only 2 mild ones. Heat and clean water, said Kieran. And nutrition has become better, added Dam. People eat more normally than a year ago, I notice. It was true, the gardens. After Kieran's advice on crop rotation and fertilization, gave twice the usual harvest this year. Plus, he had brought from Velm several sacks of seeds that had not been grown in Darv before. Turnip, peas, winter barley. People ate better. It was visible not in numbers, but in faces. Less of that tired dullness he had seen when he arrived. In winter, you cannot build. Kieran knew this and did not try. But you can plan. Long winter evenings he spent with books and with people. He gathered at his place Mert, Thorn, Ina, Bren, Rick, Var, Dam. Sometimes someone from the new residents, the carpenter, the glassmaker who had finally moved. They sat, talked, argued. Kieran showed plans for the next year, the next 3 years. He listened to objections. They were important. Ina found financial holes. Bren pointed out what locals would not accept. Dam pointed out what was harmful to health in the long term. It was similar to what he had read in the 5th book, People and Management, about how the best councils work. Different points of view, honest argument, a decision that takes everything into account. There had been nothing like that in the palace. There, courtiers agreed with whoever was stronger. Here, people said what they thought because they saw that they would not be punished for honesty. Kieran wrote in the evening in the 5th book after each such meeting. Thoughts, conclusions, what to revise in the plans. Once Thorn, who now read well enough to help with papers, asked, "Why do you write everything down?" "Because a thought not written down is a thought lost," said Kieran. "And if someone finds the books, then they will learn how I think." Pause. It is not as scary as it seems. To know how someone thinks and to defeat him are 2 different skills. Thorn thought about it. "Are you thinking about those who may come? From the capital?" "I am." Kieran looked at the fire. "They will not come now, when it becomes too noticeable." Pause. "By that time we need to be ready." "Ready for what exactly?" "For a conversation," said Kieran. "If lucky, a conversation. If not, for something else." "For war?" Kieran was silent for a long time. "I do not want war," he said. "War is an expensive and stupid undertaking. People die, things burn, everything you built is destroyed." Pause. "But sometimes war is when the other side leaves no choice." "And then what?" "Then win quickly," said Kieran. "That is also a science. I have read about it." The snow melted at the beginning of the 4th month. Kieran went out in the morning, and the first thing he did was walk around all of New Darv on foot, as he did every morning. It was a habit that had appeared immediately, to see the place with his own eyes, to notice what had changed, to talk to whom. New Darv had changed over the winter even without construction. People were different. Winter had passed normally, without fear, without hunger. It does something to people quietly from inside. It removes that chronic fatigue that accumulates from many bad winters in a row. Children played loudly on the street, in a spring way. Kieran knew most of them by name. Lord Kieran. Little Jan from the carpenter's family ran past, shouted something without stopping. Kieran smiled. Thorn approached with papers. "From Velm they came," he said. 2 letters. One from Merchant Sot. Wants to double the coal order. The second from some trading house. They want to talk about supplies of iron tools. Good. To Sot. Agreed, we will discuss terms. To the trading house. Invite a representative to come. Here? Here, pause. Let them see for themselves what is here. Thorn nodded. Left. Kieran continued the round. At the clinic, Dam had already opened the doors, receiving the first patients from the morning. He noticed Kieran nodded through the window. At the forge, Var and his apprentice had been working since early morning, the ring of the hammer heard from the other end. At the warehouse, they were unloading a cart with wood. The carpenter was commanding loudly. Everything was working. It was pleasant, not triumphant, just pleasant, like a correct mechanism turning evenly. Kieran reached the edge of the settlement, to where in spring they would begin to build the next quarter of houses, and stopped. He looked at the field that in a few months would become a street. He thought about the town hall. The town hall was the next big project, not because a beautiful building for representation was needed, but because New Darv was growing and a place was needed where questions were decided. Court, registration, taxes, trade disputes. Now all this happened in the old barn. Kieran designed the town hall himself. For a long time, carefully. Not huge, but solid. 2 floors, stone with a basement for archive and storage. And for the first time with central heating throughout the building. He had developed the scheme in winter. He refined it with the carpenter and the stonemason he had found in art. The stonemason, an elderly master named Feck, came to look at the project, stayed for a month, left with an order, and returned with 2 apprentices. "I have not built anything like this," said Feck, looking at the heating scheme. "No one here has built it," said Kieran. "That is why it is interesting." Feck loved interesting things. Kieran understood that quickly. Construction of the town hall began at the beginning of spring. In parallel, the second water supply to Small Darv, and the beginning of the central sewage line from the new houses to the settling tank, and the road. The road to the south to Velm required serious work. Kieran hired 20 people specifically for the road. Drainage ditches on the sides, gravel filling on key sections, wooden bridges over 3 small streams that previously had to be bypassed. Not a royal highway, but a normal road, on which one could ride in the rain without getting stuck. At the beginning of summer, the representative of the trading house arrived, a young man, well-dressed with an assistant. From Art, a big city with capital manners. He looked at New Darv with a mixture of surprise and professional interest. Kieran received him at the inn. They dined simply, locally, without show. "To be honest," said the representative, "I expected a village. They wrote to us Darwin lands and I understand," said Kieran. "This is not a village. Not yet a city," said Kieran. "But soon." They talked for 3 hours. The trading house wanted iron tools, shovels, axes, fasteners for construction. Their main suppliers were in the south, expensive and long to transport. Kieran offered good terms, but not dumping ones. He explained, he did not want to destroy the market. He wanted a stable long-term contract. The representative listened attentively. "You do not look like a typical lord," he said. "I am often told something similar. Lords usually do not know what dumping is. Some lords read a lot." They signed the contract, the first major trade agreement of New Darv. Not for huge sums, but regular. Every month a batch of tools to Art. This meant that Var needed a 3rd forge. By the middle of summer, New Darv numbered about 200 people. Not only those who lived there, those who came to work, trade, look. The inn was occupied almost constantly. A small tavern opened. The owner from Velm rented a plot from Kieran, paid a small percentage of income. The first market, Kieran organized it at the beginning of summer, every Sunday on the central square. Locals sold garden produce, hunters sold game, the forge sold tools. Traders from neighboring villages began to come. A market is not only money. A market is a place where people meet, talk, make decisions. Kieran knew this from the second book, and from practice already. Once at the market, he overheard a conversation. 2 visitors from a village 2 hours' ride away. "They say there is work in New Darv. I heard. And they pay honestly, they say. Maybe move? Do they give houses?" "I do not know. Need to ask." Kieran approached them, not as a lord, but as a person. "Houses are given," he said. "If you work, housing for the first year is free, then a small rent. We are building 8 more houses now." The 2 looked at him. "Who are you?" "Lord Kieran." Silence. "You yourself walk around the market?" asked one with some amazement. "Every Sunday," said Kieran. They moved a month later, not both, with families. One started working in the mine, the second as a carpenter. On the anniversary of his arrival, Kieran sat alone in the evening and counted. He did not celebrate, he counted. It was a habit. A year ago, 3 villages, 130 people, nothing but old houses and bad roads. Now, 3 mines. The coal one at full capacity, the iron one working steadily, the third quietly and methodically. Monthly income from trade in coal and iron was 17 times more than the Darwin lands had given for a year before his arrival. Permanent residents, 240 people. Another about 50 seasonal workers. Buildings, inn, forge, clinic, mill, warehouses, tavern, glass workshop, town hall in process, ready by winter. New houses, 22. The road to the south brought into order for 3/4 of the way to Velm. Water supply in 2 villages out of 3. The third this autumn. Central sewage line working, expansion planned. Waterborne diseases, 0 for the last 6 months. Child mortality. Dam reported that in a year they had not lost a single child. A year ago, 3 had died during winter. Kieran read the numbers, then he wrote in the 5th book. Year. Results beyond expectations in pace, within expectations in direction. People work well, the main thing, they believe. Not in me personally, that here one can live well. These are different things and the second is more important. New line, problems. First, growth requires more managers. I alone will not cope in a year, need a system. Second, rumor about Darv is already going to the big cities. It will reach the capital in a matter of time, months, not years. Third, the third mine requires serious development if we want scale. This means more people and more risk of information leak. Pause in the notes. What to do with the third problem? Think. Maybe it is time to stop hiding. Maybe a prepared strike is better than a discovered secret. He closed the book, went out into the street. New Darv in the evening, lights and windows, smell of smoke and cooking food, someone's voices from the tavern, a child shouting something to his mother at the other end of the street. Alive. A year after this had been a field. Kieran stood and looked. Then he went home. He had built himself a small house only last month, modest, without excesses, and went to sleep. Tomorrow, a lot of work. The town hall was ready by the end of autumn of the 2nd year. 2 floors. Stone walls, gray local stone, mined from the quarry opened on the eastern slope of the mountain. Roof, black tiles, made by the new workshop that Kieran had opened specially. Wide windows, glass from the local glass workshop, the first large product of young Tern who had moved from Velm after his father. Above the entrance, Kieran thought for a long time what to write. In capital cities above town halls, they wrote names of kings or mottos about loyalty. He wrote something else. Short, without decorations. Here they decide. Bren looked at the inscription. Simple, he said. Exactly. We could have written something beautiful. Beautiful is quickly forgotten, said Kieran. Simple is remembered. Inside the town hall, the first floor was divided into 3 parts. A large hall for meetings and court, a registration room, births, deaths, marriages, trade contracts, and a basement archive, dry with stone shelves. The 2nd floor, working rooms. Kieran's, Ina's, and 2 more people he had taken for management. Young Arn, an accountant from Velm, and a woman, Sella, who knew how to write quickly and accurately, a secretary. For the first time in New Darv, a real administration appeared. Kieran gathered all 5 in the large hall on the first working day. Rules are simple, he said. First, every decision that concerns more than one person is written down. Everyone. Pause. Second, money in the treasury is counted publicly. Any resident can come and ask what it was spent on. Ina, this is your responsibility. Ina nodded seriously. Third, court. I will handle disputes myself until we appoint a judge. Until then, no decisions that cannot be explained by logic. Not because it is customary, why it is fair. These are different things. And if the law is unfair? Asked Arn. He was sharp, liked to ask uncomfortable questions. Kieran valued that. Then we change the law, said Kieran. My lands, my laws. Within the royal regulations for now. For now, repeated Arn. Not a question. An observation. For now, confirmed Kieran. The first court took place 3 days later. A dispute between 2 traders. One accused the other of selling poor quality meat at the market. An ordinary thing, in other places resolved by shouting and fists. Kieran listened to both, in turn without interruptions, asked questions calmly, specifically, called damn. He examined the remaining meat, gave a conclusion. The meat really had a violation. Whether the trader knew or not did not matter. Return the money to the buyers, said Kieran. Plus the next 2 markets without a trading place. Not a fine in money, a warning. The trader looked, waiting for the worst. Is that all? He asked. That is enough, said Kieran. If it repeats, the conditions will be different. If not, in 2 markets you return as if nothing happened. After the court, several people who had been present dispersed talking. Thorn walked next to Kieran. Satisfied? He asked. Normal. He expected exile or worse. I know. That is exactly why no. So that they do not fear? So that they respect, said Kieran. Fear and respect look similar from outside, different from inside. Out of fear they obey. Out of respect they help, Thorn thought. The difference is big, enormous. In the 2nd year, Kieran did something no one expected. He built a bathhouse. Public, large, with hot water heated by coal. Separate sections for men and women, a large boiler, wooden shelves, all according to a description he had found in a very old manuscript. Bren looked at the construction skeptically. What is this for? He asked. To spend money on a bathhouse? Because people who wash less often get sick, said Kieran. Dam will confirm that. Dam will confirm, and because it is pleasant. Pause. People should see that to live here is not just to endure, but to live well. Difference. A bathhouse is good? For a person who washed once a month with river water, yes, very good. The bathhouse opened in the middle of summer. A small symbolic fee to cover the coal for the boiler. For children and old people, free. On the first day a queue stood from the morning. People came out red, satisfied, with wet hair. They laughed. Women from Upper Darv who had come first then for a week told everyone who had not come. The rumor spread around the area. By the next Sunday market, twice as many people had come as usual, half specially to try the bathhouse. Kieran observed this and thought about the rule he had written in the 5th book back in winter. People are attracted by 3 things: work, safety, and dignity. Dignity is when you are treated as a person and not as a unit of taxation. Bathhouse, clean water, fair court. All this is dignity. Then a park. It was Sayla's idea, the quiet secretary who once said at a meeting that cities need places where there is nothing to do. How is that nothing to do? Asked Bren. Places where you can just sit, said Sayla. Walk. Look at something beautiful. Bren looked at her as at a madwoman. Kieran thought. Correct, he said. This is a waste of money, said Bren. This is an investment, said Kieran, in making people want to live here and not just work. Pause. People who want to live build houses, raise children, pay taxes for the next 20 years. People who just work leave at the first opportunity. They laid out the park by the river. A large area planted young trees, oak benches, a small wooden bridge over the stream, paths laid with flat stone. It opened in the spring of the 3rd year. On summer evenings, both young and old walked there. Fishermen sat with rods by the water. Children ran along the paths. Traders from other cities who came on business walked there in the evening, looked, shook their heads. There is nothing like this in the capital, said one merchant from art to Kieran once. He spoke with sincere amazement. In the capital, there is a lot that is missing, said Kieran. In the 3rd year, a school. It was an idea he had been nurturing for a long time but had postponed. There was no teacher. The teacher was found by chance. An elderly monk from a destroyed monastery to the north wandered, looking for a place to settle. Thorn met him on the road, brought him to New Darv. The monk brother Tal knew how to read, write, count, knew history, and a little medicine. For a village teacher, enough. I want to open a school, said Kieran, for children. All, not only the rich. Tal looked at him. Free? Yes, there is no such thing. Here there will be. What do you want in return? Nothing, said Kieran, except that the children learn to read and count. Pause. In 10 years, I need literate people. That is the return. Tal thought for a long time. Good, he said. The school opened at the beginning of autumn. 23 children on the first day, from 7 to 14 years old. A small building next to the town hall. Kieran came on the first day to look. He stood by the door, did not enter. Listened as Tal explained letters. Jan, the carpenter's son, the very one who had once shouted to him at the market, sat in the first row and looked with such a concentrated expression that Kieran involuntarily smiled. He left without interfering. By the 3rd year, New Darv could no longer be called a village. Permanent residents, 800 plus people. Seasonal, several hundred more. Streets, 4 main ones, paved with flat stone, several side ones. Market every Sunday and Wednesday, already 2 markets a week, because one could not accommodate everyone. Production: 3 mines, forge with 4 forges, glass workshop, carpentry workshop, small tannery opened by a newcomer from Velm Mill Bakery. Trade: coal to 3 cities, iron goods to 5. Local glass, special with a bluish tint from local sand, suddenly began to be in demand in art as decorative. Young Tern could not keep up. The road to Velm fully ready, normal with postal poles every 2 miles. Kieran looked at all this and thought that it was time to take the next step. The 3rd mine, time to open at full strength. The quiet mining regime gave money, but for what he planned more was needed. Much more. He gathered a narrow circle: Mert, Thorn, Ina, Tern. "I am telling what most of you already know or guess," he said. "In the 3rd mine there is gold and diamonds. Not huge reserves, but significant. So far we have mined quietly with a small team." Pause. Now we change the approach. "We open it?" asked Ina. "No." Kieran looked at them. "We expand extraction, but only through our people. No external workers in the 3rd mine. No mentions in trade books. Gold still through Tern and small portions through different channels." "Why continue to hide?" asked Thorn. "You are the lord of these lands. It is yours by right." "No," said Kieran. "By right it is royal." He looked at their faces. "The law of the kingdom says that precious metals on any land belong to the crown. The lord receives a 3rd. Pause. "I do not intend to give a 3rd to people who exiled me on the basis of a lie." Silence. "This is a violation of the law," said Arn. He was also present. "Yes," said Kieran. "Directly and honestly, yes." Pause. "But there is something more important. If the capital learns what is here, they will come. Not for a 3rd, but for everything." He looked at them. "I am building this place for you. For the people who live here. If they come from the capital, this place will stop being yours." Silence. "What does 'if they come' mean?" asked Ina. "They will come sooner or later anyway." "Yes," agreed Kieran. "That is why we need time. Another year, maybe 2. Pause. "In that time, there must be a wall here." "A wall?" asked Mert again. "Around the city," said Kieran. "A real one." "Stone." Pause. "And people who know how to defend it." Construction of the wall began in the spring of the 3rd year. They did not immediately announce that it was a wall. They announced that it was a city boundary for order, for marking territory, for protection from wild animals which were plentiful in the forest. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. There was enough stone. The mountain quarry had been working for the 2nd year already. Feck the stonemason looked at the plan and shook his head. "This is not just a wall," he said. "No, this is a fortress wall." "Yes? For a village?" "For a city," said Kieran. "Which it will be." Feck thought for a long time, looked at the drawing. Wall thickness, height, corner towers, the only gates at the southern entrance. "Good work if it turns out," he said finally. "I have not built anything like this, but we can." "How much time?" "With 100 workers and enough stone, a year plus a little." "We have less time," said Kieran. 8 months. Then 150 workers. "We will find them." They found them not immediately, in 3 weeks. From the area, from Velm, from distant villages. The rumor about good pay spread quickly. They built all the warm season. Kieran checked every day, not nitpicking, but looking. Thickness of masonry, quality of mortar, verticality of walls. If something was wrong, he said immediately, without shouting. They redid it. In parallel, another process that Kieran conducted quietly: military affairs. In New Darv, there appeared people who knew how to fight. Among the 800 residents, there were former soldiers, discharged from the army, fugitives from poverty. Kieran noticed them by the way they walked, by the way they looked. He called them one by one, talked, offered work officially as city guard. In reality, a small detachment that he quietly trained, armed, organized. Thorn became his deputy in this, unexpectedly for himself. Kieran explained tactics, logistics, management of people in battle. Thorn learned quickly he had a natural commander's instinct that had simply never been directed in the right direction. By autumn of the 3rd year, the guard numbered 40 people. Not much for war, enough for defending a good wall. The wall was ready at the end of autumn. Not ideal. Some sections required finishing in spring. But it stood. Gray, solid, with 2 corner towers, and gates with a heavy grate raised by a chain. Kieran walked along the wall on the upper passage for centuries in the evening, when the workers had dispersed. He looked at the city from inside. Lights in windows, many lights. Noise that could be heard even here. Voices, someone's laughter, a horse snorting in the stable. Smell of smoke, bread, something metallic from the forge. Alive. Real. Thorn walked next to him. Beautiful, he said quietly. From below, you cannot see how big it has become. From above you can see, said Kieran. Do you think about what will happen when they learn from the capital? Constantly. And let them come, said Kieran. When they are ready, we will be too. Thorn looked at him. Are you not afraid? Kieran thought. I am afraid of one thing, he said, that I will make a mistake that will harm the people who trust me. Pause. Not that an army will come. That is solvable. Not that brothers weave intrigues. That is familiar. I am afraid of making a mistake here. He pointed to the city below. Thorn was silent. You will not make a mistake, he said finally. How do you know? Because you think about it, said Thorn. Those who do not think about mistakes, they make them. You think? That means you see them before they happen. Kieran looked at the young man. You are smart, Thorn. You taught me. No, said Kieran. It was your own. I just did not interfere. They stood on the wall and looked at New Darv at night. The lights below burned evenly. Tomorrow, another day of construction.